Okay.
Hello and welcome in. We'll get started in just a few moments. There are several coming in and getting their audio connected, so get comfy and we'll get started in just a minute. Welcome in to today's session. If you are here for cultural humility as an everyday practice, you are in the right spot, and we'll get started in just a few moments as people are coming in and getting their audio connected. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're about to get started, so I hope you're comfy and ready for this breakout session. You are here in cultural humility as an everyday practice. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. My name is Crystal Dalmasso. I'm with DECA and I will be your moderator for this session today. You are in this session, cultural humility as an everyday practice, so I hope you are right where you were wanting to be because we are gonna be in for a treat this afternoon. I'll introduce our speaker in just a second, but just a couple of reminders. This session is being recorded and it will be available on the conference platform 1 hour after the session ends. But we do want to hear from you. So remember to use the platform chat and you can ask questions in the chat, add your comments in the platform chat. So we will be monitoring that chat. We do ask that you remain muted and unless Vanessa asks for you to unmute yourself, and then that way we can continue on. Otherwise, keep yourself muted. And I'd like to introduce Vanessa Loaf, and she's going to take it from here and tell us a little bit about herself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Crystal. I hope everybody's having a good conference so far and that you enjoyed your keynote speaker this afternoon. My name is Vanessa, and I'm a project specialist for the Center for Public Health Initiatives at the Wichita State University Community Engagement Institute. And in addition to my current work with the center, I have over 25 years of experience as a licensed bachelor social worker in the areas of child welfare, early childhood education, and organizational development, which includes managing an early Head Start program for teen parents in Wichita in one of my previous lifetimes. And in addition to my public health work, I have the honor to facilitate an interdisciplinary team of folks here at CEI that provide training and technical assistance for organizations that are working to become more trauma-informed in their everyday practice. And part of that is better understanding cultural humility. And so I'm really excited about being here today. This is what I plan on focusing on in our hour together today. We're going to talk about the difference between cultural competence versus cultural humility. Cultural humility may be a term that's a little more new to you. We're also going to briefly talk about how culture influences and impacts you and your coworkers and the families that you work with. And then talk about some strategies that you can potentially use to improve your cultural awareness and areas where you can build some skills in doing that as part of your own work. So I'm hoping that you're going to engage in some discussion with me along the way today. So please, as Crystal said, keep that keyboard close and use the chat in your Passable platform so that, and I will try to pay attention to that. Crystal's going to help me with that too. And we will see how that goes today. So let's start by defining what we mean by culture. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, these are on your screen are the aspects of the primary definition of culture. That first aspect addresses culture at a group level of race, religion, maybe social groups. Next is the shared attitudes, values, and practices at the organization or institution level. So we have culture at the individual level, we have culture as it relates to your organizations and systems and workplaces. Then we have a set of values or conventions that are within our field of practice or expertise. I'm a social worker by education, and so we have certain culture in social work. Some of you may be healthcare practitioners, nurses. Home visiting has its own culture. Luckily, I've kind of come up in my career around home visitors, and that's a culture that fits really well with my social work values. And so that may be another aspect that we're thinking of at culture in that larger societal kind of way. And then the final aspect is the idea of integrating all of those things into how we pass our values, our practices, all of that kind of stuff on to the groups of people that come after us, whether that's through the next generation or the people that succeed us after we leave our positions, wherever that might be in our work lives. So it's not just that current state, but how do we pass those traditions and practices on to the next iteration of folks that are maybe doing the work or maintaining and valuing the same kinds of things that we do. As you all know, culture impacts every aspect of our lives, including how our actions are perceived, how and if services are accessed, how people respond to interventions. In this sense, culture is the shared values, traditions, arts, folklore, and institutions of a group of people that are unified by a variety of cohesive group differences. Culture is applicable to all people. Everyone is impacted and has a culture that they grew up as a part of or that they work within. It's active and it's dynamic. It's multi-layered. And it exists both at a conscious and unconscious level that structures our perception and shapes our behavior. We also each have our own unique cultural identity. And that cultural identity is a combination of multiple interlocking social identities and our memberships in different cultural groups such as race, ethnicity, religion, our socioeconomic status, our sexual orientation. All of those things are an interlocking part of that cultural identity. And those identities shape our life experience. They influence sources of chronic stress for us. They may also influence our sources of resilience and support. So some of you may have been with us yesterday when we were talking about building resilience. It also shapes access to what we call social determinants of health. Things like housing and education and access to healthcare and nutritional food. These cultural identities also influence our views of health and pregnancy and childbirth and what it means to be a parent, which in particular is going to impact you as home visitors. That some cultures see pregnancy as something that should happen at home and be surrounded by family. Others really believe strongly in that being a process that is between the parents and their doctor, right? And so thinking about how those processes should go and who's in charge when it comes to parenting, or do they believe in a co-parenting model? That's all going to be influenced by all of these social identities that we're a part of. And it's also going to influence their perceptions, in your case, of home visitors and the people who should provide those kinds of services, and whether or not they're willing to access those services and invite people into their home. Our cultural identity is complex, and it can change over time and place. It's not a fixed point. And where I live in the country at any given time, or how old I am at any given time, is going to influence my cultural identity. And since we all embrace those social identities in very different ways, there can be just as many differences among people within a group. So people who are parents are going to have a wide variety in how they believe, and will be just as different in that small group as they are in the wider different cultural groups in their communities. So, generally, we judge people and what their culture is by what we see on the surface. How they dress, how old they are, what gender they are, the language that they speak, maybe their race and ethnicity or their physical characteristics. Are they using a wheelchair? Do they have a visible or invisible disability? But usually we decide that just by looking at people. But culture isn't just about what we can see. And under those things lie things like a person's sense of self, their notions of modesty, their concept of cleanliness, their rules for social interaction and child rearing practices, and how they make decisions and approach problem solving. And even the concept of justice and the perceptions and beliefs around mental health, physical health, illness, and disability. And that's just naming some of it. So I want to engage you in an activity here. And so I want you to think about yourself and how you came up. And if we accept dictionary's definition of culture, think about how many cultural groups you belong to. You kind of saw that wheel that I just had up there. And if you're comfortable, I would like you to use your Passable chat to share 5 cultural groups that you identify as belonging to that impact how you see the world. So I'm going to give you an example. For me, I'm a white woman of German descent who grew up in Kansas. And I had strong women in my family that worked outside the home and raised their children on their own after divorce. And as I mentioned earlier, I was also educated in the field of social work. All of those things are cultural identities, being a white woman of German descent in Kansas alone. And then the social work and independent female role model. So if you're willing, pick 5 and put those in the Passable chat. I'm excited to see what you share.
My chat shows disabled.
Are you using chat in Passable or in Zoom?
In Zoom?
Yeah, you want to go to the Passable.
Okay.
And there should be a chat right there where you click to enter the session. Thanks for asking, Starla. I'm guessing you're not the only one that has that challenge. And some of you, of course, are maybe thinking about it. Often, I don't know about you all, but some of us who identify as being white often tell people we don't have culture. We're just white, which is very not true. So how are you doing? Are you able to enter things in there? There we go. Thanks, Eva. So a woman of my age who's a mother and a working mother outside of the home. Thanks, Eva. Oh, Angela says she's a white female with a strong religious family who was educated as a teacher and lived in a small town. So kind of that perhaps either small town or rural kind of culture. Thanks for that, Angela.
Well, this is Starla, and I can't figure it out. So
that's okay.
I'm a Caucasian woman raised with, well, my mom was Hispanic, my dad was Caucasian, rural, Methodist. So
awesome. Well done. Thank you, Starla. So you perhaps have some different, you identify as Caucasian, but you said your dad was Hispanic. So you maybe have some different kinds of influences there. I see Kathy says that she is an Asian woman that's a mother of adult children and was grew up in a military family and has been a military spouse for 20 years. And that's definitely a culture that it has an influence on how we think and act. Very good. Carol says that she's a woman in her 60s that works. She's a grandma and a mom, white, an educator, but a child of European immigrants that were farmers in the South. Nice. Sharon is of Croatian descent, Catholic, and a mother and grandmother. White, Erica is white Midwestern Democrat, cisgendered mom. Thanks for that. Karen says Christian background, white female that living within 30 miles of the place you were raised, and the mom of adult children. Nice. And we see others that were teen mom. Thanks, Christy. Some of you are college educated, Irish, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, raised in a split parent home with strong-willed parents. Amen to that, Beverly. A woman of faith and married to a Native American man, which definitely is also going to influence how you think and act in your home. Awesome. Thank you all for being, those of you that were able to figure out the chat, thank you so much. Cassandra, I see that you added that you were raised in Johnson County with parents who maybe are still married and some traditional values and identify as Black. Thank you. Yeah, nice. Thank you all for being willing to share that. And as you're thinking and continuing to think about that, and feel free to continue to add things to the chat if you like, I'd like you to now think about the 5 people that you feel closest to. And if they describe themselves, you don't have to put this in the chat, but if they were to describe themselves in 5 groups, like you just did, how much overlap would there be between your 5 groups and theirs? And you can answer in the chat if you want to, but just think about that. All the people that you feel closest to, would they use those same words to identify the cultures that they feel like influence how they see the world? And for many of us, the answer to that is yes, they probably would use at least maybe 3 of the 5. Leah, I hope I didn't mess up your name, but more than half would overlap, yeah. Beverly says your best friend shares a lot of those same cultural identifiers that you do, right? And I think that's true for many of us. And one of the things that we have to think about though, when we think about that is that can, we tend to, it's kind of a birds of a feather kind of thing, right? That many of the people that we're closest to may have some of those same social identities, but then that can also limit our familiarity with the many other identities that exist in our communities and our awareness of other people's lived experiences. So when we lack that familiarity and awareness, we can be more prone to making assumptions and judgments. You know, if we don't know what it's like to grow up in a small town or in a community that identifies with a different race and ethnicity than ours or different cultural values than ours, sometimes that can lead us to kind of getting into that more judgmental space. What I'd like you to do next is take a look back at your own list and cross out number 2 and number 4. And my question to you, once you have identified those, is would you be willing to erase those perspectives from your life? Dawn, thanks for that. Yeah, sometimes your cultural identity is being the new kid on the block. So thanks for that. So when you look at your list of 5, your own list of 5, would you be willing to let go of the perspectives of the 2nd and 4th thing on your list? You can just shoot those in the chat. Yes or no? Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of no's. Of course you wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't, because that makes you who you are. But when we ask people to respond and behave according to our expectations and cultural beliefs, that's exactly what we're doing. We're asking them to cross out parts of themselves. Culture informs when something is labeled to be a problem and who that appropriate helper should be, what that helper should do, and what the goal of that help should be. And if we're to be effective as home visitors and in our other personal and professional relationships, we have to ensure that we're honoring somebody else's perspective in their life journey. So I'm not going to ask you to answer these questions, but as you think about how you approach your work, whatever your role is in your organization, some of the questions that you can ask yourself about that are, what do I know about the similarities and differences between my social identities and those of the people that I'm serving? And what knowledge do I need to acquire about those social identities to better understand their cultural values and beliefs? So a little bit of food for thought there. So many of us, thank you for being willing to be brave and share about your backgrounds. I really, really appreciate that and hope that that has given you some things to kind of think about as we go further into this conversation. Many of us over the years have been told that we should strive to be culturally competent, whatever that means. And so if we look at that word competence, throw in the chat, what does that word competent mean to you? When you hear the word competent, not even necessarily culturally competent, but competent, what does that mean? Understanding. That's a popular answer, thank you. Able to do something, that you're knowledgeable, maybe you're sure of your self-worth. Knowledge. Good job, Starla, you figured out the chat. Capable, yeah. Skillful, right. So often that means we're really good at something, right? And that we have the skills that we need to do something well. But for our purposes today, we're going to define cultural competence as a developmental process through which a person gains the awareness, knowledge, and skills to work and communicate effectively in cross-cultural situations. So I want to be very clear about this being a process that's kind of technical, that we spend time learning to build our knowledge and skills related to cross-cultural situations. But the thing is, that word competence can sometimes imply that you are the expert at something and that you know all there is to know about it. And we know that that's not possible when it comes to culture. You know, some of you may be, I'm in Wichita, and some of you may be from Wichita. And in the Wichita Public Schools, there are at least 105 different languages spoken in the school district. It would not be possible for school district staff to totally have an expert level of understanding of all of those cultures that are related to those 105 languages. It's just not realistic. And so we have to be careful that we don't confuse this idea of being competent with being all-knowing. And that's kind of where cultural humility comes in. So based on what we've learned about cultural competence as kind of that developmental process, we can sum up cultural humility as a reflective process of understanding one's biases and privileges, managing power imbalances, and maintaining a stance that's open to others in relation to aspects of their cultural identity that are most important to them. So I'm curious, as you look at this definition, what stands out for you about this idea of cultural humility as opposed to cultural competence? What stands out for you about this definition that maybe you haven't seen before or haven't thought about it in this way? Ideas in the chat? Self-awareness. Thanks, Eva. Thinking about those power imbalances, absolutely. And we're going to talk about that more in just a minute. Thanks, Carol. Reflecting on our own biases and how that affects our cultural competencies and unlearning those. Thanks for throwing in that word, Alexis. I really like that. Thanks, Lois. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you all for kind of chiming in on that. I want to talk about this idea of cultural humility a little bit more. So there are three aspects of cultural humility. The first is a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and to self-critique. And underlying this piece is the knowledge we are never finished. We never arrive at a point where we're done learning. As you can kind of see in the picture that I have there, that we're a part of a bigger universe and just a small little part of that. And so we have to be humble and flexible, but bold enough to look at ourselves critically and desire to learn more. And when we don't know something, are we able to say that we don't know? Can we admit it? Because, you know, if we're competent in our work, it's hard to admit that we don't know something. So that willingness to act on the acknowledgement that we have not and will not arrive at a finish line is integral to this aspect of cultural humility, of lifelong self-reflection. And understanding is only as powerful as the action that follows it. The second feature of cultural humility is a desire to fix those power imbalances where none ought to exist. There are times when those power imbalances are necessary, but there are a lot of times that they exist and they don't have to. So recognizing that each person brings something different to that proverbial table of life helps us to see the value of each person. When you interact with a parent, they are the expert on their own life, on their challenges and their strengths. And you, as a practitioner, hold a body of knowledge that the parent might not, but the parent also has an understanding outside the scope of your body of knowledge. And so both of you have to collaborate and learn from one another in order to get to the best outcomes for them and for their kiddos. So you may hold some power in the science of child development or medical knowledge or procedural knowledge, but the parents hold power in their personal history and preferences. And one of the things that we often have to remember is just the fact that you are coming from the outside into their home is an automatic power difference. And one way to level that is to meet them where they are, like you do in their house. But some of you work for health departments that are considered governmental, and there's an automatic perception of a difference of power there. And so we have to be very mindful of even those perceived power imbalances so that we can try to help parents see past those as well. The last aspect of cultural humility includes aspiring to develop partnerships with people and groups who advocate for other people. We know as individuals we can create positive change, but communities and groups also have a profound impact on the systems around them. We can't commit to self-evaluation and fixing power imbalances without advocating for those things within the larger organizations and systems that we participate in, like the healthcare system or the early care and education system. So cultural humility, by definition, is larger than our individual selves. And we have to advocate for those things to happen systematically. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. Thank you for letting me kind of help you think about the definitions that we have of that. And now I want to kind of switch to talking more about some of the influences and impacts. So this information comes from the National Center of Cultural Competence. And individuals and groups have lots of different cultural orientations to life that impact how things are, including things like past, present, and future orientation, whether they're very focused on the past, or if they're very focused on the here and now, or if they can see into the future, whether we're inner directed and motivated or we're outer directed and motivated. Thinking about the good of one versus the good of the whole is all influenced by our cultural upbringing. So all of those different orientations not only affect how we perceive communication, but also how we behave and the challenges that we face. So some of the other factors that influence diversity among individuals can be internal or external. So internal factors are things like who makes up our family. For some families, it is just that nuclear family. For some, it includes extended family like grandparents, aunties, and uncles. But then there may be folks that are called aunties and uncles, but they're not blood related at all. And so we have to think about how our family is defined, what our literacy skills and education are, our beliefs around healthcare and mental health care, our religious and spiritual views, even our political orientation is an internal factor. But external factors, if we go on, includes things like institutional bias, racism and discrimination, intergroup relations, group and community resiliency, our natural networks of support, and the overall political climate and our community demographics. So those are things outside of ourselves that may influence culture. But the last one I also want to point out to you is history and the social context of populations are important to know as well as you can. For instance, there are some cultural groups that have a long history of migration and resettlement across the globe that have contributed to their present day customs and their beliefs and how they live. You know, whether they all live in a small space or if they live in those kind of nuclear families in multiple dwellings that live close together. There are a lot of populations that we see that have been colonized by at least one nation, and we can maybe count the US as one of those that started out with our Native American and indigenous peoples, and were colonized by the British. And that has influenced our current culture. That's the same true for those that come from India. And Eastern Indian populations it influences their language, the kinds of foods that they eat, all of those kinds of things. And so thinking about that history also adds to the context of learning about the cultures that we might encounter. Now, one of the reasons we can't master other people's cultures is that we're all a unique intersection of all of these various aspects of culture. Our sense of self and space. Are we huggy people, you know, before the pandemic, maybe? Are we huggy people? Do we prefer that people keep their distance? Do we have our bubble? Are we formal in how we talk to people? Do we expect to be called Mr. and Mrs.? Or is it okay to call our doctor by their first name? How we communicate and the language that we use, not just whether we speak Spanish or English, but whether we use a dialect of some kind or a lot of slang, how we use hand gestures, how we dress, the kinds of foods that we eat and how we eat them. Whether it's okay to eat pork, you know, or not, or does the pork need to be kosher, all of those kinds of things. And a really kind of interesting one for me that I often talk to groups about is this idea of time and time consciousness. And so I'd love really quickly if you would get your chat box out again and tell me in the chat, what does it mean to you to be on time? If you tell somebody you're on time, what does that really mean? So Karen says 10 minutes early. Connie says 5 to 10. Several of you are say 5 to 10 minutes early. Eva says being respectful. Yeah. So for many of you, that actually means being early. So Danielle, thank you for being honest. 5 minutes early to 5 minutes late. Sarah, me too. I try. And my group of friends who are all social workers, we often talk about social work time, which usually means we're late. Yannis, it is right on the dot, right? So for some of us, that being late, I have run into many people in child welfare work who think on time is actually 5 to 10 minutes late because they get so wrapped up in talking to their previous client that they're running behind, right? So my next question for you is, how does it feel, or how do you react when somebody arrives late to an appointment with you? Maybe the parents are late to an appointment, or somewhere outside of your job? Anxious, disrespected, that maybe the person that they were with has their undivided attention. Yeah, you're kind of like me, maybe miss those clock time cues. Sarah says that there's kind of an automatic 15 grace period. Katie says it's hard to be on time. Thanks, Leanne. So when it's a client, it's okay. If it's outside on your own time, you get irritated and find it rude. That's interesting that you've kind of drawn that line. So for those of you who feel anxious or disrespected, why do you think that is? Yeah, you know, it depends on how late they are, right? But why do you find it rude? Because time is so precious. Thank you. Yeah. And for many of you, your schedules are stacked. And so one person's late, then it's, wow. Then it just snowballs from there, right? Thanks, Eva. If someone's late for something important, then you feel like maybe you and your time is unimportant to them, right? So you can also see how some of us hold different values, whether we're the person being late or if someone is late to something where we are. Yeah. Kathy, right.
I was having trouble with the chat box. Is it okay just to tell you on here?
Go ahead, Ashley.
Okay. For me, on time, I think my parents were, with the jobs that they had, like that was installed in us when I was little. Like we had to be on time, and on time meant 15 minutes early. So I think sometimes we grow up with that as well too. And so it makes you feel like, oh, this is what on time means to me.
That's right. You're absolutely right. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. And then those tapes start to play. We start hearing our parents in our head when we're late, right? So nice. Thank you all for being willing to engage in that conversation. And you can see on your screen, we're not going to get deep into it today because we don't have time, but all of those kinds of things impact what our relationships might be like and who's in charge of making decisions in the family. The position of women and the social order and beliefs and attitudes about a woman's place is in the home, dad's is, or the other way around, right? It also impacts how we think of work and our work ethic, which connects with what Ashley was saying about being on time, that you need to be there and be ready to go, and how we divide labor may be impacted. So it's stunning. This is just the short list of all the things that culture has an impact on that we maybe don't think about every day. So I want to spend the rest of our time together talking about some of the opportunities that we all have for doing some skill building, and the different levels that we can use to be doing that. So the first level is at the personal level, and this is part of that cultural humility part, right? Thinking about that self-reflection and self-critique. So the journey to providing culturally appropriate services really does start with taking a good long look at ourselves. And that might be the toughest part of the process, is admitting when we don't know things and what makes us uncomfortable. But as we engage in that reflective process, we can work to become more aware of our own personal attitudes and our knowledge about others' beliefs and practices. And in your case, maybe that's about healthcare or child rearing, and what it means to invite people in their home. And because our state has such a wide diversity of populations, gaining knowledge about all of those cultures would take a really long time. But we can easily, and maybe easy isn't the right word, but we can evaluate our own values and attitudes about other cultures so that we can then respond in the most appropriate ways to the people that we serve. The next level is at the interpersonal level. So practicing cultural humility requires us to communicate with others from their vantage point, not just from ours. And that includes an ability to communicate with others who have different languages and worldviews than we do, and building our capability of translating ways of seeing and behaving from one culture to another. The next level is at your program planning level. So those of you that are doing this work at the program level, the cultural perspectives influence how our programs are designed and implemented. And depending on who's doing the designing, they may or may not fit with the culture of the people that they're intended to benefit. So different populations are going to respond to programs differently. And what works with one group or one neighborhood or one population may not work for another group. So when we design programs that serve diverse cultural groups, we can practice cultural humility by respecting other people's values and identity. And that's more than just language. Many of our programs have gotten fairly good, or at least pretty aware, that we need to have things available in multiple languages. But it goes beyond that, in thinking about how we show respect to those folks and how we're sharing power with the people that we serve. At the organizational level, this might include an ability to establish an organizational vision and leadership that promotes a positive multicultural work environment. So it's not just about your services to your families, it's about how the family or the organization views its workforce and respecting the cultural differences within that. So it may be that they're promoting the capability to create and implement policies and procedures that foster that diversity and engagement of populations or other organizations that might see things differently from them. And that includes looking at our hiring practices, our promotion practices, how we keep our staff, as well as the ways that the organization can include the voice of the people you serve when they're developing those policies and practices. And then lastly is policy and advocacy. And that might include the capability to assess and revise existing policies and procedures in the planning, the delivery, and the evaluation of your programs and services for diverse populations, as well as the capacity to review and revise policies that allocate resources to those culturally diverse populations, such as translation services, interpretation services, there's a difference there, and how we can allocate resources to create equity so that folks have access to the quality services that you all provide. So those are the different opportunities for skill building, but we're going to kind of focus the rest of our time on what you can do kind of at the personal and interpersonal level, but these same ideas can also be used at those program and policy kinds of work, but I want to focus on you all. So I've said this several times, self-reflection. Taking the time, kind of like I asked you to do in a very brief, superficial way today, of what is your culture and how does that influence how you perceive the folks that you work with? Does it mean that you maybe have some implicit biases that you hadn't really thought about before? And so thinking about that awareness of what you believe and what you hold dear and how that impacts your ability to relate to and interact with your clients. You also want to recognize what you don't know and be open to learning as much as you can. One way to do that is to review your local census data so that you better understand what groups exist in your service area. I know some of you are focused on particular zip code areas, and so then looking at the census data to better understand who lives in that zip code. And then take advantage of the opportunities in the community to learn what you can about those populations by going to local events or festivals, or attending some sort of picnic or educational program, or inviting them to come in and talk to your group, to your team about their cultures, rather than just learning about it through PowerPoints and that kind of thing. Go out and experience those things. Maybe your kids have cultural days at school, and you could go chaperone and hang out with your kids as they learn about other cultures. And we also really want you to think about being open to other people's identities and empathize with their life experiences and how their social identities are impacted by maybe being a less dominant culture in a dominant space. And what might that feel like? And how can you work on those power differences and convey respect and let them know that I don't know everything in a respectful way, and think about those in ways that are non-judgmental. And of course, home visitors are maybe best at this than others, but acknowledging that people are their own best authority, not you. You also want to be sure that you observe the behaviors and the individuals that have beliefs that are different from your own, and talk with them about the similarities and differences. And think about your communication practices, which might even mean learning a little bit of a second language, just enough. I had a health department that I worked with a while back that their receptionist learned just enough Spanish to be able to say, hold on a second, let me get you somebody who speaks Spanish. To be able to meet people where they are and help them understand that I'm sorry, I can't be the one to talk to you, but don't leave. We want to get you somebody who can. But also paying attention to your own communication style. I have a team member that talks 1,000 miles an hour. And if she is talking to somebody where English might not be their second language or their first language, English is my first language and I can't keep up half the time. So thinking about how do I talk, and do I need to slow down, and what kinds of words do I use are important. And I also want to make sure that you're thinking about offering safe spaces to the people that you serve and talk about their experiences, including their experiences with you and how you interact with them, and that they feel okay giving you constructive feedback. And then if they do that and you realize that you have made a misstep, that you address that and apologize meaningfully for that. Pitfalls that I think you already know. You want to be careful and remind yourself and other staff sometimes that skin color does not determine a child or family's culture. It does not determine a staff member's culture. So we have to be careful that we're not forming impressions of people and families too soon based on what we see on the outside, and that we're drawing conclusions about them because of where they live or who they live with, and that we generalize what we know about a certain population to the entire population, because that never works out well. And that we don't forget that there are individual variations even within the family. Anybody who would meet me and my youngest sister would never guess that we're related. Our values are very different. How we go about approaching family and work are very different. Neither's better than the other, but they're very different, and we have to think about that. So we don't have very much time left, And I have several other slides that, and if you haven't found it already, I put all of the slides in the pathable outcome. So I think what I'm going to do, because I've thrown a lot at you and I want to hear more from you, is I'm going to ask you, what kinds of things have you done to try and improve your understanding of other cultures? What kinds of things have you done to try and, you know, if you're working with families who are different from yours, which I'm guessing you are, what are you doing to learn more about those families and their culture? So trying to make sure that you're doing cultural related visit activities. Thanks, Tara. Oh my goodness, I wish I were at your visit, Eva, where you had a mom teach you how to make tortillas. Nice. I think that would be a really interesting thing to do for socialization groups or parent playtime, is have the parents bring something from their culture and teach the rest of the group. That sounds like an awesome idea, Eva. Very cool. Ask. Oh my gosh, I can't emphasize that enough. Thank you, Beverly. Just ask. Ask them to tell you about what family traditions they celebrate, what they want their children to hold on to when it comes to that. It's so valuable for all families. Thank you for that. You also work to use children's books that are more representative of the families that you're working with. Thanks for that. Love it. Other ideas of what you've done for trying to increase your own understanding of the cultures that you're interacting with? So Alexis, yeah, it's always good. I do the same thing, is try to follow social media accounts that are run by some of the marginalized group, like Indigenous, different kind of Indigenous peoples, the LGBTQ community, and learning about their issues. That helps go along to that role of being an ally and advocate as well. Thank you for that. Going to community events, like Recovery Out Loud and festivals. Thanks, Christy. Own voice books. So trying to understand from that perspective, awesome. That's really awesome. Thanks everybody for being willing to share that. With the couple of minutes that I have left, I'm just gonna fly through these, but remember you have the slides. But these are kind of the bottom lines kinds of things. Those of you that were in my workshop yesterday, we talked about the importance of relationships. Relationships, relationships, relationships. Establish relationships that are based on mutuality and respect. Understand the origins of the historical and collective traumas that they might have experienced and the intergenerational transfer of those. Especially as we get into more conversations about race and Indigenous experiences. And don't minimize the wisdom and strength of people who have survived and lived. They have a lot to teach us. But also helping them teach us about the realities of their life right now. And then understand that you can't do this alone. So believe in that collective wisdom of the community. Involve people in the development of their own strategies, and create and maintain strong networks with other kinds of organizations and systems to help make that community stronger. I am not going to do this, but this is something that you could do as with your team. And that is sit down and ask yourselves as a team, what are we doing well in regard to addressing cultural differences? What could we do better? And what kind of strategies could we consider? And maybe there's some of the ones we talked about today. Maybe there are others that you know about and have been thinking about. But use that as a way to have those conversations as a group, and maybe ask those same questions, or at least the first two, of the families that you're working with. What are we doing well? And what could we do better when it comes to incorporating culture? I want to thank everybody. We just have 1 minute left, I think. And I want to thank everybody for being so engaged in the conversation today. I know that this is just the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully you were able to pick up a couple of extra things to think about related to cultural humility. If you have a question for me, feel free to shoot that in the chat real quick, and I'll try and catch them before our time runs out. But I am so looking forward to hearing more about what you all are doing in your programs to expand your thinking and how it impacts your ability to relate to your families. So thank you so much, everybody. Feel free to put questions in the chat. And do we have anything else we need to offer, Crystal?
No, thank you so much, Vanessa. I have so many notes that I took right here. And if you did not and you want Vanessa's slideshow, it is under the files right where you were posting in the chat. You can download those before you leave this session. You do have a 15-minute break before your next session, so you can grab another quick cup of coffee or Dr. Pepper or pop, whatever you are drinking this afternoon, and then head on to your next session. But I encourage you to download those files if you have not done so, because this was a phenomenal breakout session today. So thank you, Vanessa, for leading it. Thank you for showing up, and we will see you for our final breakout session this afternoon in about 15 minutes, so 3 o'clock.
Awesome.
We'll see you soon.
Everybody.